Tell you what I'm going to do. I am going to stay here and answer as many detainee questions as need to be answered. I don't know that I'll know the answers to all the questions, but if I don't, we'll find them, because it seems to me it's time to tap down some of this hyperbole that we're finding.
Mr. Secretary,
Yes.
is John Walker being treated the same way as the other detainees?
Yes.
Shackled, hooded in the transfer?
Oh, my goodness, now, look. Is he being treated like the other detainees, shackled, hooded, and what have you? Oh, well, let me say this about that. When people are moved, they are restrained. That is true in prisons across the globe. Will any single prisoner be treated humanely? You bet. When they are being moved from place to place, will they be restrained in a way so that they are less likely to be able to kill an American soldier? You bet. Is it inhumane to do that? No. Would it be stupid to do anything else? Yes.
Mr. Secretary.
What about all these so-called torture memos?
Well, there were, what, one or two or three, I don't know the number, but there were not all of these so-called memos. They were mischaracterized as torture memos, and they came not out of the Bush administration per se, they came out of the U.S. Department of Justice, blessed by the Attorney General, the senior legal official of the United States of America, having been nominated by a president and confirmed by the United States Senate overwhelmingly. Little different cast I just put on it than the one you did. I'll chalk that one up.
Was the reaction unfair?
Well, I've never read them.
Really?
No. I'm not a lawyer. What would I know? I've never seen so much misinformation communicated about a place than was the case about Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. This prison was exceedingly well run, yet the impression that's left is that it was a terrible place and people were tortured and people were abused. Prisons aren't pretty places, but that prison is probably as well run as any prison on the face of the earth. If you go and ask somebody in a big audience, how many people do you think were waterboarded at Guantanamo? And people stick their hands up and someone will say, well, hundreds. The answer is nobody. Zero were waterboarded at Guantanamo. The military never waterboarded anybody in an interrogation. The CIA waterboarded, as I understand it, 3 people. But it wasn't at Guantanamo, and it wasn't done by the United States Department of Defense.
El-Qahtani was never waterboarded?
No. Now, were there some things done that shouldn't have been done at Guantanamo? You bet. When someone looked like they were a very high-value detainee, the Department of Defense didn't deal with them. The Central Intelligence Agency did, and properly so. In the case of Qahtani, he was a high-value detainee, and for some reason he wasn't transferred. Someone junior in the chain of command decided that he was probably the 20th hijacker. General Hill wrote a memo. There are 3 categories of interrogation techniques that we would like you to consider for approval.
How unusual were these techniques?
Oh, they ran the gamut. One of the techniques recommended was waterboarding, which I rejected. Others would be
yelling at the detainee, techniques of deception, where you'd use multiple interrogator techniques. Interviewer may identify himself as a citizen with a reputation for harsh treatment. Category 2 techniques, stress positions like for a maximum of 4 falsified documents, or the use of isolation facility for up to deprivation of light and auditory hood placed over his head during transportation and questioning, 20-hour interrogations, removal of all comforting religious items, removal of clothing, forced grooming, shaving of facial hair, detaining individual phobias such as fear of dogs to induce stress. Category 3 techniques, use of non-injurious physical contact such as and light pushing. I think that's all. Good grief, that's a pile of stuff. Jim Haynes, the general counsel, sent it to me with a cover memo. I recommend that you approve most of the things in Category 1, if not all, most of the things in Category 2, if not all, and 1 or 2 or 3 of the things in Category 3, but disapprove the others. I remember one of the things required that he stand for 3 or 4 or 5, 6 hours. When I approved it, I wrote down that, you know, I stand for 8 or 10 hours a day. I forget what I said, but something like that. Needless to say, I did not intend that my memo would then be sent back down the chain of command. In the case of Gattani, some of the things that were done to him were not approved. And the interrogation plan involving the duration and the combination of the techniques was not proper. Up came a concern expressed to the general counsel. We hear some of these things are being done to this fellow that aren't approved or aren't proper in the interrogation plan. And he came in and told me, and I immediately rescinded that memo. Some weeks later, we reissued the enhanced interrogation techniques. There was criticism from some of the military people in the chain that by suspending them for a period of weeks, we were putting at risk the American people.
How do you know when you're going too far?
You can't know with certainty. All the easy decisions are made down below. When you say, how can you know? The answer is you can't. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could see around corners? Have our imaginations anticipate every conceivable thing that could happen, and then from that full array and spectrum, pick out the ones that will happen.
Is there any evidence to indicate that Iraq has attempted to or is willing to supply terrorists with weapons of mass destruction?
As we know, there are known knowns. There are things we know we know. We also know there are known unknowns. That is to say, we know there are some things we do not know. But there are also unknown unknowns. The ones we don't know, we don't know.
We just want to know, are you aware of any evidence? Because that would increase our level of belief from faith to something that would be based on evidence.
Subject to discuss with P, meaning the President of the United States. The absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. When you say the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, what you're saying is that there is an absence of evidence about something, but you ought not to say that therefore that is proof that something doesn't exist. It's an easy thing to go from the first part of that in the wrong direction and say, well, the absence of evidence means it isn't there.
If an inspection team goes in now and finds nothing because perhaps Iraq is very good at hiding it, or perhaps they have nothing, but you all are of the belief that they have it. If they find nothing, does it make your job more difficult in trying to assemble an international coalition to disarm him by other means?
Goodness gracious, that is kind of like looking down the road for every conceivable pothole you can find and then driving into it. I just don't get up in the morning and ask myself that. We know they have weapons of mass destruction. We know they have active programs. There isn't any debate about it.
It was thought to be the best intelligence available. How do you describe it when it turns out to be not accurate? Do you describe that as a failure of intelligence? I suppose some can not unfairly suggest that. Saddam Hussein may have been fearful that he would be discovered as having those weapons, removed them or destroyed them, but not wanted to tell anybody that he'd done so. He may have destroyed them, unwilling to admit it, fearful of being seen as weak.
Wouldn't it be strange if he had destroyed his WMD and got invaded anyway?
Of course, I'm not suggesting that that's the case. I honestly do not know what the case is. All I know is that the intelligence community persuaded the president and Secretary Powell. He spent days preparing himself to make his presentation to the United Nations.
And he spent years trying to explain why he had done it.
It's a short sentence. The reason he presented it was because he believed it. October 15th, 2001. Subject definition. Please give me a good definition for terrorism and some elaboration as to what it is and what it isn't. Thanks. December 28th, 2001. Subject, adopting common terminology. I suggest we use the following terms. Afghan Taliban, Afghan officials and fighters of the former regime. October 31, non-Afghan Taliban. Subject, definition of victory. Where is that definition of victory? January 6th, 2003. Subject, terminology. I want to make a list of things I've done at the Pentagon, like getting rid of words. National missile defense. Requirements. Readiness. Dash. Ready for what? October 1st, 2003. Subject. Please get me the Oxford Dictionary definition of several and type it up for me. Thanks. May 14th, 2004. Definition. Please give me the dictionary definition of scapegoat. Thanks.
And where did this term shock and awe come from?
I don't know. Apparently General Franks read it. He used it. It became part of the press discussion.
But the idea of shock and awe.
I've told you all I know about that phrase. I picked up a newspaper today, and I couldn't believe it. I read 8 headlines that talked about chaos, violence, unrest, and it just was henny penny, the sky is falling, I've never seen anything like it.
And here is a country that's being liberated. Here are people who are going from being repressed and held under the thumb of a vicious dictator, and they're free. And all this newspaper could do with 8 or 10 headlines. They showed a man bleeding, a civilian who they claimed we had shot, one thing after another. It's just unbelievable how people can take that away from what is happening in that country. Stuff happens. But in terms of what's going on in that country, it is a fundamental misunderstanding to see those images over and over and over again of some boy walking out with a vase and saying, oh my goodness, you didn't have a plan. That's nonsense. They know what they're doing, and they're doing a terrific job, and it's untidy, and freedom's untidy, and free people are free to make mistakes and commit crimes and do bad things. They're also free to live their lives and do wonderful things, and that's what's going to happen here.
Mr. Secretary.
This was another violent day in the streets of Baghdad.
One of Washington's nightmares came true.
The Bush
today.
administration is admitting it wasn't fully prepared for the huge task of governing post-war
Now
Iraq.
troops patrol these streets knowing that to many they are not liberators but occupiers.
It's a situation the Pentagon admits it failed to
The
anticipate.
Pentagon is scoffing at suggestions that an organized guerrilla resistance is forming.
July 23rd, 2003. To General John Abizaid. Subject, definitions. Attached are the definitions of, quote, guerrilla warfare, unquote, quote, insurgency, unquote, and, quote, unconventional warfare, unquote. They came from the Pentagon Dictionary. Thanks. It seemed to me that there are ways you can talk about what the enemy's doing that help the enemy unintentionally, and ways you can talk about what the enemy's doing that harm the enemy, that make his task less legitimate, more difficult. What you're seeing is Rumsfeld floundering around trying to figure out what do all those words mean, what do other people think they mean, what are the best ones to use that will benefit the United States of America.
One of you suggested I go to the dictionary.
No, I didn't ask this question.
Yes,
But he would have.
I have since gone to the dictionary, and I have looked up several things, one of which I can't immediately recapture, but one was guerrilla war, another was insurgency, another was unconventional war. Pardon me? No, that's someone else's business, quagmires. I don't do quagmires. As I looked at the dictionary, I'm not uncomfortable with unconventional, because it is not an army, and it is not a navy, and it is not an air force. But even there, the dictionary, the Pentagon Dictionary, I haven't looked in a regular dictionary, the Pentagon Dictionary does not even land that one perfectly on what's taking place.
The Bush administration has been on a stepped-up PR campaign to stop the erosion of support at home for the dangerous mission
Today,
in
an
Iraq.
unprecedented series of bombings left a trail of death and devastation.
The concern that Iraq's reconstruction is, in fact, falling well short of expectations.
Today in Fallujah, Iraqi guerrillas used a roadside bomb to bring an American patrol.
Critics accuse the Rumsfeld team of being underprepared for post-war conditions on the ground and unwilling to share decision-making with other government agencies.
Acknowledgement that long-simmering tensions over Iraq and its aftermath, particularly between the Departments of State and Defense, have now reached full boil.
October of 2003, I became worried that we were having trouble measuring progress. And I wrote a memo called Global War on Terror. Are we winning or losing the global war on terror? Question mark. Is DOD changing fast enough to deal with the new 21st century security environment? Question mark. Are the changes we have and are making too modest and incremental? Question mark. my impression is that we have not yet made truly bold moves. Although we have made many sensible, logical moves in the right direction. But are they enough, I asked. Today we lack metrics to know if we're winning or losing the global war on terror. Are we killing or deterring more terrorists every day than the madrasas and the radical clerics are recruiting and deploying against us? It's pretty clear that the coalition can win in Afghanistan and Iraq in one way or another. But it will be a long, hard slog. It was Christmas time. I can recall going up to the secure phone closet. It's in the second floor of our house, not too far from my bedroom. What was in there was a noise system that sounded like an ocean wave. They had scooped up some people, low-level people, who might have some reason to know where he might be. He'd been moving around the country every day, sleeping a different place, moving around in taxi cabs. Also moving around were some body doubles, people who looked exactly like Saddam Hussein. Indeed, had the same distinguishing marks on their bodies. Some low-level individual said that he believed he knew where Saddam Hussein was. They inspected this farm out in the middle of nowhere. There was a trap door. They opened this up. Lo and behold, here was this bedraggled, bearded man down in that hole. Saddam Hussein clearly concluded it was all a bluff. The United States was a paper tiger. They weren't going to do anything. The first Gulf War left him feeling that no one was going to bother him. He was the person who prevailed. He obviously felt that he was a survivor. And he was, for a while. Someone said, "Do you want to go see Saddam Hussein after he was captured?" And I said, no. I said, I would like to talk to Tariq Assis. He's a complicated situation for me. As the number 2 man, simultaneously Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister for Saddam Hussein. And you meet with him, you come away with that he is a perfectly rational, logical individual. I've spent hours and hours with him. You wonder what goes on in a mind like that. I would love to talk to Tariq Assis and figure out what in the world they were thinking. What else might the United States have done to reach out to them and get them to behave rationally? On February 6, 2003, to Jim Haynes, subject detainees. I'm concerned that the detainee issues we were wrestling with have not been resolved. And as far as I can see, it has just dropped into a black pit. We have to get it figured out. January 10th, 2003, subject detainees. I have simply got to know when you folks are going to be prepared to brief the White House on detainees. In fact, I don't think I'll even do it that way. Instead, let me just say you should be prepared to brief the White House subject to NSC or the Principals Committee on Detainees, including the most recent issue that has been raised no later than next Tuesday, January 14th. I want to get briefed on the Iraqi detainees fast. I'm really worried about it. Thanks. When the pictures came, it had an impact that was well beyond anything that I'd experienced.
Why do you think the pictures did it?
What it showed was people engaging in acts of abuse that were disgusting and revolting. There were pictures showing that prison guards in the midnight shift were doing things to prisoners that didn't kill them, that didn't create injuries that were permanent, but they were engaging in sadistic things and there was nudity involved. I knew that it would create an advantage for the terrorists, for Al-Qaeda, and for the people in the insurgency who were out recruiting. They could show that the Americans were treating people badly. It worked against everything we were trying to do. I walked in and said to the president, I'm the senior person and I believe in accountability. Here's my resignation. It was in my handwriting. I didn't want to dictate it or have it typed up by somebody. I felt a very strong sense that something terrible had happened on my watch. He said, Don, I recognize how you feel about this, but that's not going to solve the problem. I'd testified before the House, testified before the Senate, tried to figure out how everything happened. When a ship runs aground, the captain of the ship's generally relieved. You don't relieve your presidents, and I couldn't find anyone that I thought it would be fair and responsible to pin the tail on. So I sat down and wrote a second letter of resignation. I still believe to this day that I was correct, and it would have been better for the administration and the Department of Defense, and better for me, if the department could have started fresh with someone else in the leadership position.
So you wish it had been accepted?
Yes.
There is a claim that the interrogation rules used in Guantanamo migrated to Iraq, where they led to incredible abuse.
The evidence is to the contrary. There were 12 investigations that looked at these issues, some by civilians, distinguished people like Dr. Harold Brown and Dr. James Schlesinger, former Secretaries of Defense, others by military officials, to suggest that the procedures from Guantanamo migrated over to Iraq is to suggest that the procedures in Guantanamo would have encouraged the kind of unbelievably bad, illegal, improper behavior that took place at Abu Ghraib. And there's nothing that would have permitted anything like that. Anyone who reads the investigative reports knows that's not the case.
This is from the Schlesinger report. Changes in DoD interrogation policies between December 2nd, 2002 and April 16th, 2003 were an element contributing to uncertainties in the field as to which techniques were authorized. Although specifically limited by the Secretary of Defense to Guantanamo and requiring his personal approval, given in only 2 cases, the augmented techniques for Guantanamo migrated to Afghanistan and Iraq, where they were neither limited nor safeguarded.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a fair assessment. Mm-hmm.
Are you saying stuff just happens?
Well, we know that in every war there are things that evolve that hadn't been planned for or fully anticipated, and that things occur which shouldn't occur.
Wouldn't it have been better not to go there at all?
Well, I guess time will tell. Barack Obama opposed most of the structures that President George W. Bush put in place. Guantanamo Bay, the concept of indefinite detention, the Patriot Act, military commissions. Here we are years later, and they're all still there. I think that kind of has to validate, to some extent, the decisions that were made by President George W. Bush. We went to Bethesda and Walter Reed a great many times. The strength that you felt from the families and the people wounded was just absolutely an inspiration. It was an intensive care unit. The doctor said, this guy's not going to make it. We walked in, met the man, talked to him, talked to the family. I don't know what the word is, but the family, the wife said, I know he'll make it. I think it was probably 2, 3, 4 weeks later I went back, and sure as heck the doctor said he made it. Unbelievable. So we're a very fortunate country, and the good Lord willing, we won't have to be engaged in wars. But I'm afraid human nature being what it is, that we'll have to continue to ask young men and women to come and serve our country, and their lives will be at risk.
When you're in a position like Secretary of Defense, do you feel that you actually are in control of history, or that history is controlling you?
Oh, neither. Obviously, you don't control history, and you are failing if history controls you.
Are you surprised when you go back and read these memos?
Oh my goodness, yes. I can't believe some of the things I wrote. I don't know where all those words came from. February 4th, 2004. Subject: what you know. There are known knowns. There are known unknowns. There are unknown unknowns. But there are also unknown knowns. That is to say, things that you think you know, that it turns out you did not. If you take those words and try to connect them in each way that is possible. There was at least one more combination that wasn't there: the unknown knowns. Things that you possibly may know that you don't know you know.
But the memo doesn't say that. It says we know less, not more, than we think we do.
Is that right? I reversed it. Put it up again. Let me see. There are also unknown knowns. That is to say, things that you think you know, that it turns out you did not. Yeah, I think that memo is backwards. I think that it's closer to what I said here than that. Unknown knowns. I think you're probably, Errol, chasing the wrong rabbit here.
As ubiquitous as those suicide bombers have become in Iraq, far more people are now being killed by executions than by those bombers.
Another 40 bodies today dumped on the streets of Baghdad, tortured.
But with an especially deadly October and Iraq tipping towards chaos.
The U.S. is on the brink of failure in Iraq.
A parade of generals called Rumsfeld's war strategy flawed.
The Democrats are in. Donald Rumsfeld is out.
Firing Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld and replacing him with a veteran of his father's administration.
Mr. President, thank you for your kind words. The great respect that I have for your leadership in this little understood, unfamiliar war, the first war of the 21st century. It is not well known, it was not well understood, it is complex for people to comprehend, and I know with certainty that over time, the contributions you've made will be recorded by history. Thank you.
Mr. Secretary.
December 15th, 2006, to Pentagon personnel from Donald Rumsfeld. Subject, snowflakes. The blizzard is over. Over the past 6 years, thousands of these memos have fallen. Sometimes in blizzards, and sometimes in cold and lonely isolation. Yet, as surprising as this may seem to those who may have been buried in the deluge, there are many people in the department who have never received a snowflake. This snowflake is especially for them. Its message is perhaps typically to the point. Thank you. The blizzard is over.
One last question. Why are you doing this? Why are you talking to me?
That is a vicious question. I'll be darned if I know.